would send faxes from their real estate offices with the message that had been sent out among all the real estate and development interests. So it was truly a remarkable situation where you had basically the money and the bosses, if you will, on one side, and you had the votes and the citizens on the other side. And we did ultimately prevail. It's important to let people know that SOS election was the highest turnout voter election in the history of the city up to that point in time. And we won by a 65% margin after a year-long campaign. It was a great victory, and it was a victory for all the citizens in Austin. I just had the privilege to be part of a group of people heading it up, but it was truly a citizens' victory. But I tell people those numbers because they forget what an overwhelming mandate it was. The other side spent huge amounts of money. We were literally up against a man who owned the world's largest gold mine. Money was no object on the other side. But what we had on our side were this small band of determined citizens, and it grew every day. Every house party, every communication we sent out, every word of mouth message about the importance of SOS and how it would protect Barton Springs grew our army day after day. It was unusual to have a debate that lasted that long all across the community. And I heard from people on the other side that if you didn't know what was going on in the city on this issue, you must have been living under a rock, because everyone knew. In fact, I heard one story about a polling firm that had been hired by Freeport-McMoran that did, they just did sort of person on the street focus group interviews, and I think they were out at Barton Creek Mall, and they did a focus group with shoppers who just happened to be walking by. And they all knew more about impervious cover limits. They knew more about how it contributed to pollution of the springs. They knew more about what was in the ordinance than these guys had ever seen. And they were working for Jim Bob Moffitt, and they also knew about Jim Bob Moffitt. And in fact, the advice of the polling firm after they got their results back was, send this guy away on a very long vacation, because he's not helping the cause. We heard in the course of the campaign that a friend of ours was a disc golf player, and he came back from the disc golf course one day, and we said, how was the game? And he said, it was good, but there was this real Jim Bob up in front of us, and he was slowing us down, and he was being a real jerk. And I said, did you just say he was a real Jim Bob? And he said, yeah, that's the phrase everybody uses to refer to somebody who's a jerk. So his name had gone into the lexicon of Austin, vocabulary. At any rate, it was a truly remarkable thing, and the other side literally did everything they could to try and defeat us, and they were not successful. They went so far as defying a court order. We'd gotten the petition signatures necessary to put the item on the ballot, and the council refused to call the election. They were violating the city charter. And so we got attorneys who worked for us for free, and we brought action against them for refusing to follow the city charter, literally refusing to call the election. And a court found in our favor and found against the council members and said they were violating the law. And the court ordered them to call the SOS election. I remember the day really clearly because it's one of my favorite days. It was St. Patrick's Day, March 17th. So that one lives in my memory. But the council members still refused to call the election. And in fact, they refused to even show up for the council meeting. This is part of the history that I think is so fascinating. They were so beholden to the real estate interests that wanted to develop that land that they were willing to violate a court order. They were willing to violate the city charter, and they refused to show up for several called council meetings. They actually refused to show up for 3 or 4 different council meetings that were called day after day after day so that they could follow the court order and call the election. And when they finally showed up, they got such horrible press. Marquees at sandwich joints all over town were blasting the council members for failing to show up and being AWOL for their council meetings and violating the court order. And when they finally showed up, the Rule Council all abstained. Rather than voting yes or no on calling the election, as the court had ordered them to do, the 4 council members, Reynolds, Erdy, Larson, and Epstein, all abstained, meaning they refused to vote yes or no. And then there was a huge uproar all over town on even more sandwich boards and restaurant marquees and theater marquees. There were blasts against the council abstaining and refusing to call the election. And when we finally appealed it to a higher court and they again ordered them to call the election, it was past the deadline for calling the May election. And that was their real plan. They wanted to delay it long enough so they could say, oops, it's too late, we can't order the election for May. The election should have taken place on SOS in May. And their plan was to delay the election until August so that they could file applications for development and then go to the legislature and claim that they were grandfathered, that they'd already filed their development applications and they shouldn't have to comply with new rules that were passed after they'd already filed their elections. And so that was how the SOS election happened to occur on August 8th of 1992. So this August is the 20th election, or the 20th anniversary of the SOS election. But it was an enormous success that the citizens of Austin achieved, and it changed a whole generation, both of public servants and of people who were interested in public service. There were many young people who worked for the canvassing organizations for Clean Water Action and for Texas Campaign for the Environment and even for Sierra Club and other groups who were really inspired to go into public service because of what they saw that the citizens of Austin could achieve when we all worked together. And so to me, that's one of the really fundamental lessons of SOS, is what we can do if we organize and we dream big enough and we go after it. So I say, congratulations to the citizens of Austin. This is a wonderful history. Let's mark this 20th anniversary with many celebrations, starting with Earth Day, because it was on Earth Day in 1997 that then Secretary of State Bruce Babbitt finally listed the Barton Springs salamander as an endangered species. And that's part of the reason we can still swim in Barton Springs today, because there's federal protection for the habitat for the salamander, which is only found in this segment. It's called the Barton Springs Aquifer. So let's celebrate this Earth Day, let's celebrate this 20th anniversary year, and let's go out and make a difference for protecting the environment in Austin. Thank you all so much.